One of the sources of this doubt about hell, obviously, as far as you mentioned the brotherhood of man, that's a big source, but there's also kind of a direct criticism of the traditional view on
Right.
hell. Obviously, we don't want to really make this a Balthasar episode, but it's worth mentioning at the very
Yeah,
least
sure.
Hans Urs von Balthasar
Yeah.
and his view on it. And regardless of what specifically he meant, we can say that the practical upshot of his work on this subject is that most people don't think anybody goes to hell. Most Catholics don't think that. Whether that can all be laid at his feet, I guess we could question that. But certainly, in terms of even so-called, not the best term, but conservative or Orthodox Catholics, are, as you said, are not really that strong on this issue. And I think at least in our circles, that can probably be laid primarily at his feet, right?
Yeah. It's unfortunately that's the case. That his little book, Dare We Hope That All Be Saved, and has had a huge impact on people. And he clearly says, I'm not teaching that everybody's saved, but I'm saying we have an obligation to hope that everybody's saved. But in that book, he makes so many snide comments about the tradition, about Augustine, about Aquinas, about fathers of the church. I mean, he just mocks them in a horrible way. And then he quotes lots of people who say, if God doesn't save everybody, he's not my God, in a very sympathetic way, like he's hiding behind people who go further than him. But then he sums up his teaching. He says, this quote from Edith Stein that she never published perfectly expresses what I believe, that it's infinitely improbable that people will ever end up finally resisting the grace of God. That's not the picture that's given to us in sacred scripture. That's not what the Catholic Church has ever believed. That's not what's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And so, unfortunately, Balthasar is such a magnificently educated person. People are mesmerized by him. There's lots of good things he says. So my critique of him isn't a global critique about everything he's written, but it's only about this one particular issue. Unfortunately, I think this one particular issue is the most important issue of all because it affects the salvation of souls. So even though he does really good stuff on the need for theology to be rooted in prayer and just lots of good stuff, this thing has slipped into his writings, and I think it's been slipped in actually by doctrines of demons. I think it's a demonic doctrine that we should presume that most people go to heaven, or almost everybody goes to heaven. And it's controversial to say this, I'm going to be attacked because I'm saying it here, but I think it's true, I think it has to be said. I actually only did a little bit on Balthasar in this current book, A Church in Crisis, but I wrote another book called Will Many Be Saved? What Vatican II actually teaches about this issue and its implications for the new evangelization, where I did a full scholarly chapter on Rahner, a very large chapter on Balthasar, where I treated it from a theological point of view. In this book, I talk about some of the spiritual influences that actually influenced Balthasar in this issue, but the real theological critique is in another book called Will Many Be Saved? So, yeah.
Right. Well, the only thing I had read by you before this new book is your essay on Balthasar and von Speyr. I just stumbled across that and it looked interesting, and I read it. It's a lengthy critique of their relationship. It's an investigation, basically, of not just the specific spiritual things that were going on that are a little bit scary, maybe, but also the general dynamic of their relationship, which was that they were essentially each other's spiritual director with no oversight, and she in fact removed him effectively from oversight by convincing him that it was the will of Saint Ignatius that he should leave the Jesuit order.
Yeah. Well, very few people have read that long essay that I published in the Angelicum Journal in Rome. And so I brought a few pages of it, summarizing it into this book because I feel like it needs to be paid attention to. I think there's some very troubling things in that relationship. I think the fact that she claimed to be in continuous communication with St. Ignatius, and that St. Ignatius was telling Balthasar to leave the Jesuits and move in with her, which he did, and so many other things as well. Balthasar makes a statement, well, when von Speyr went to hell, she didn't see anybody there, so I guess there's nobody there. It's like, it just seems like it's so ripe for deception, spiritual deception. It's shocking to me that he totally put his trust in her and totally believed everything she said. He even said things like, her work is more important than my work, and after I die, people are going to try to separate us, but we're absolutely one. And he had sympathies towards universalism from the very beginning. His doctoral dissertation on German literature, he had very sympathetic conversations with Karl Barth about this issue, saying, well, we can't say there isn't a hell, but we don't have to say that there's anybody there, according to Barth's biographer. So it's a little bit like he found in von Speyr a confirmation of his tendencies in that direction. Now, he had so-called good motivation. He says, modern man can't believe in a God who will send people to hell. So he was trying to do his own, I believe, misguided apologetics. God can defend himself. We can't shape the revelation he gives us. We can't make God in another image that's more amenable to modern man. And that's really what's going on in the church today. That's what's going on with the German Bishops' Conference. They're trying to accommodate divine revelation to the culture. They're trying to make the message of the gospel more palatable. Now, it's good to make it as palatable as possible, to make it as attractive as possible, to make it as, quote, winsome as possible, but not by distorting it, not by leaving out parts of it, but by delivering the whole counsel of God.
Yeah, you mentioned his tendency to be dismissive or snarky about saints or spiritual classics in his writings. I haven't read that book myself, but just come across some things from him where, I've noticed that just as a pattern, he says something pretty dismissive about St. Augustine. He was very dismissive of St. Josemaria's book, The Way, although he later recanted that. He was very dismissive, critical of the book, The Imitation of Christ. I mean, he said it was anti-intellectual and all this stuff. And I noticed that because I'm aware, one of the other things about von Speyr I'm aware of, that there may be a connection here, is her claim to be able to enter into the prayer lives of different saints and historical figures. And there's a whole book published by Ignatius of her kind of locutions, or I guess that's not the right term, but on this, where she would even enter into, and critique the prayer lives of saints like St. Thomas Aquinas. And it's like, okay, I guess I can't rule out that, that would be possible by God's will, but I can't possibly see the benefit to the church of that or making that public. Maybe there was some fault in St. Thomas's prayer life, but gosh, why do I need to know about it?
Yeah, well, Father Paul Murray, who's a Dominican who teaches in Rome, who's an expert on Thomas Aquinas' spirituality, says that that's just a crock. It's just not true. Thomas had a very profound prayer life, and it's nonsense what she was saying about Thomas's prayer life, And I think the whole claim to enter into the souls of other people, like she claimed to enter into confessions that von Balthasar was hearing and to assist him, and to be there, or she claimed many outlandish things, which I think violate so many principles of spiritual discernment to really give them credence.
Sure, yeah, and also there's an element of untoward curiosity in Balthasar, sort of saying, "Oh, tell me about this person. Tell me about this person. Tell me about this historical figure. Tell me about this famous writer." Kind of like. That's like she could do these things on command almost, and that just doesn't ring true. I couldn't state a principle which would deny this, but based on my intuitive knowledge of other private revelation and the lives of saints and things like that, that just doesn't seem like the sort of thing that happens or that is done.
Well, whatever the source of this fog of universalism is, I think finding its sources is a worthy endeavor. But I think for most people, we just need to tell people what the truth is without getting into necessarily what the sources are. need to tell people what Scripture actually says, what Jesus actually says. Like I quoted Matthew chapter 7, but Luke chapter 13 is very significant. People ask Jesus, will there be few in number those who are saved? And that's really a direct, in-your-face question. So it's really interesting here. What is Jesus going to answer to this? So he doesn't say what some people might think he'd say, like, oh, chill, I didn't mean to upset you. I mean, don't you remember your scripture classes? Don't you remember literary form? I was just exaggerating. I better turn off my phone here. That was Jewish hyperbole. Don't sweat it. Type of thing. He didn't say that, but he also didn't give out numbers or percentages. But what he said is very clear, and very sobering. And if we don't pay attention to it, most people don't, even though it comes around in the liturgy all the time. We're really foolish. He says, try very hard to enter by the narrow door, because many, I tell you, will try to enter but will not be able to. And then when the master closes the door, those who are outside can't enter anymore, and they'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth.